steps to heaven. For some strange reason there, I saw when I was doing the sound check, they're full of dead leaves. There's some meaning behind that. So welcome. I'm glad you made it. And also welcome to all of you who are not physically here in the body, but joining us from other parts of the planet. I have to look into this black hole that is at the back of the room. I'm glad you could make it too. I assume you're not in a hurry to start. Come on, let's get on with it. What are you waiting for? Nothing. The weather forecast is good. A little bit of rain tomorrow morning, it says, and then the rest of the week, sunshine. But only if everybody tomorrow morning surrenders to the rain. So while you're here, or if you're not here physically, you can also participate from wherever you are, at home or wherever it may be, and make it also into retreat wherever you are, if that's possible. One could say, let's put it very simply, while you're here, and hopefully after you leave also, the greatest advice I could give you is watch your mind, which means be aware of your mind instead of being your mind. Be the awareness behind the mind. In certain Buddhist monasteries that I visited a long time ago, the monks use that expression, watch your mind, when they say it to another monk. And what it really means there is, shut up. But they're too polite to say it. And of course, watch your mind is a great way of saying it. But here you, of course, instead of saying it to other people here, you might be tempted, who knows, use it as a signpost, an inner signpost. So be there as the silent presence. And that's already the entire secret, which isn't really a secret, but somehow it still is. To be aware awareness or presence is a space of just being conscious. Not at some future point when we've gone through the 12 or 25 steps, or how many steps there may be to full consciousness, but right here and now. Very important, don't wait to achieve some kind of state. Don't wait to achieve liberation or enlightenment or some kind of fireworks or some kind of transcendent experience, which you may have, but that passes too. The transcendent experience has a beginning and an end, and then you're back with your, oh, I had such a great experience last year. I want to get back to that. How do I get back to that? Don't try to get back, because that's not the way, that's the wrong direction. And don't try to get forward to the expectation of an experience. One of the great obstacles, especially for those of you who could be considered or who consider themselves to be spiritual seekers, which this may actually have become part of your identity because you've attended many talks, retreats, you've visited the ashrams in India and the monasteries, and you're extremely knowledgeable, but you are seeking for that high. Am I going to make it in this lifetime? And then you go to some Buddhist or other teachers, and then somebody may say, you need about 15 more lifetimes. Okay, I can live with that. No, you can't. These are all concepts in the mind. So letting go of any expectation of achieving a particular state, but becoming completely aligned with whatever is here now, whatever is in this moment, and the transcendent depths of this moment. Then there's nothing to seek anymore. And your search ends the moment your mind ceases and some stillness arises. And you know it's there without naming it. That's the end of the search. Now, you may adopt the search again when the stillness gets covered up again by mental noise, because you have in your mind, there may be for some of you, the seeker identity, and that identity wants to carry on seeking, and that identity will tell you after a moment of stillness that wasn't enough, it wasn't the fireworks. But it is enough, but this deepens the state. Now, this is a little paradox, because it's full of, the spiritual life is full of paradoxes and spiritual discourse. The timeless state of consciousness, which is presence, deepens. Now you can see the slight paradox in that. So over time, the timeless state of consciousness deepens. It manifests more and more fully through you, and yet it's timeless. So we are here to live this, and this is a protected environment, not without challenges. Even here, this beautiful place, it's almost a kind of ashram. Even here, some challenges may arise because life is like that. It does that to you. And some of you, on your journey here and arriving here, may already have experienced a few challenges. How did you respond to the challenges? It doesn't matter how you responded. If you were not present and the challenge made you reactive, and mental, emotional, reactive movement. So that's fine. If you realize it now, it's never too late. Oh, that was that. I was unconscious. Isn't that interesting? But you can see it now, so you must be conscious now. And then wait for the next challenge. You may have arrived in your room and it was very small and like a monastic cell. And mentally you compared it to wherever you were on your vacation. It's not the Ritz-Carlton, obviously. But a monastic cell is a lovely place for surrender and realizing that very little is needed for presence to arise. It's much more likely to arise when things are taken away from you, rather than when things are added to you. The mind doesn't know that. The mind thinks something needs to be added to you in order to awaken an added experience, an added realization, an added whatever it may be, a vision, angels, whatever. So the mind expects to be added, by adding something, then I will arrive, adding a future moment. So it expects that, but the realization is that nothing needs to be added for awakening. This is not to say that on the level of your personality, the historical person, there are not things for you still, unless you are 95, there are not still things for you to do. There may be interesting things for you to add to who you are as a person. You can add new experiences, you can travel, you can learn something new, a language, take up a musical instrument, read books, to add build up a business, whatever it is, adding some on that level. There's nothing wrong with adding things to you, and on that level of the person or the personality, you're never really complete. There's always more that you could do, and if you pursue one particular avenue, that excludes then many others. You could add things by becoming a great sports person if you're young enough. So you train hard and you enjoy it. Of course, that excludes, then it's unlikely that you will develop into an intellectual, and because you don't have the time to read the books. But if you read the books, then that excludes that you're not physically active for 6 hours a day. So you choose this particular avenue, and you're never complete. There's always more you can do, and life sometimes demands that you do certain things. It gives you a challenge, or you choose a challenge. It's usually better to choose a challenge on the level of the personality, and on the level of the person. The person has its own life, and they choose something, have a goal, I want to do this, that, or the other, without the expectation that this goal, once you achieve it, will take you to ultimate satisfaction. It can't do that. Or will reveal to you who you really are, give you your true identity. So when you're looking in this level of the person, when you're looking to worldly, all the things of this world, through achieving this, that, or the other, that this will give you some very satisfying sense of identity, of being you, the sense of having arrived. Because almost everybody who is still trapped in ego has a sense of something that should happen hasn't happened yet in my life. There's something missing. So this can be very strong in the forefront of your mind, or it can be in the background, the sense of lack, the sense of something is not quite right here, but you don't know what it is. You're not at ease in the world. There's an underlying sense of unease. And for some people, the underlying sense of unease is so all-pervasive that they don't even know it, because since early, even childhood, it already started, and so they don't know anything else. There's always this underlying sense of unease, this underlying sense of either there's something not right, I'm not right, or something that should be happening hasn't happened yet, or even something that did happen should not have happened. That whatever it may be, in whatever way you interpret that underlying feeling of unease. But if you're completely trapped in ego, it will be there. Sometimes it may surface very strongly, in which case you become very anxious, or very, very sad, or very depressed, or you can manifest in many ways. You can even get angry, it can be part of that. So there's this, and if it's been there for many years, you don't even know it. It's unlikely that this is the case with anybody that's present here, because you would never come here if there hadn't been something that makes you aware, at least, that there is a sense of unease in you, and that you know that you begin to suspect that something else is possible, that there is another way of being in this world. There is another way of being in this world. There are still many millions, though, who don't know that. So they live with constant unease. Sometimes it manifests as fear, it can manifest as anxiety, or just a more obscure sense of something not quite right. And another way it manifests is that people see themselves as a problem. So your identity is basically you're a problem to yourself. You consider yourself a problem that needs to be solved. And then, of course, you go to a psycho something and says, please solve the problem of me. I am a problem to myself. And you are a problem to yourself. That would be a great thing to realize, that you're a problem. But if you're really deeply immersed in that, you don't even know that. if you're really deeply immersed in that pattern, it's always the others who are the problem. So if you're very unconscious, you wouldn't even say, I'm a problem to myself. No, it's he, she, they are the problem, not me. And so perhaps you wouldn't even seek a psychotherapist, because if you seek a psychotherapist, at least there is an admission that change is possible and change is needed. But there are still millions who don't even know that the inner change is possible and needed. It's all out there. And these people are very active online. You might have noticed, because that's an ideal forum for them to externalize their inner mental state. And a lot of what goes on there is, admittedly, I don't know if one can still use that word or whether it has become politically incorrect, but I'll use it anyway. A lot of what goes on there is actually crazy. I think if it's not politically correct yet, it soon will be. So you know how a humming sound, that if something is like a refrigerator or some noise in the room is going on and on, you no longer know it's there in the background, but when it stops, then you suddenly know, oh, it feels so good. There was this constant humming sound in the background. I didn't even know it anymore. I didn't know it. And so for some people, the first awakening is to become aware of the humming, so to speak, of their mind, the constant chatter, the constant dialogues and monologues that make life so hard. And so you become aware suddenly, that for many humans that's a moment of awakening. What is my mind doing? And then you begin to be able to differentiate between what is in this moment out there, what is, and your mental interpretation of what is. If you're very unconscious, the way in which you interpret the phenomena that surround you and that constantly change, people, events, situations, places, when you're very unconscious, the way in which you mentally interpret and mentally react and mentally emotionally react to other people, places, situations, and so on, are perceived as a single phenomenon. You cannot differentiate between what is out there and how you see what is, how you interpret it, what you call it, the narrative that you spin around what is. They have a single thing, you experience as a single thing. And so the way then in which a very unconscious person interprets the phenomena that happen around you continuously is determined by the conditioning of their mind, the mental emotional conditioning. So they don't experience almost anything as it is. They experience it through the veil of their mental conditioning. And a lot of that mental conditioning is verbal. It is, in many cases, an important part of it is a narrative in your mind. And so if you become aware of the narrative in your mind, that's a great step forward. It's a great awakening. And when you see that the way in which you're talking to yourself about something that's happening here and now, and the mind says, this shouldn't be happening, they should know better, why can't they do better? Why do I always encounter situations like, why are people always so obnoxious? I just can't stand people anymore. Why is this person, look how he pretends, he's pretending to be spiritual and just, you can see he's completely unconscious. What's this place? Why did I even come here? Well, I'm stuck here in this room, and is it even clean? I could be in a much more comfortable, if I hadn't left home, I could be in a much more comfortable place at home. Why did I do that? Well, why would you always do things? It's completely pointless coming here. I mean, what is this man even talking about? And so it goes on and on. And you cannot differentiate between what is and how your mind interprets what is. It's crazy. So the moment you can separate, you see, here's the isness of things. This is what is. Here I am, and there's that person talking about whatever, politics. And you may find in yourself an urge to say something. But it could happen here, even here, because it's unlikely that you left your mind outside the boundary of Omega. It came with you. But that's a good thing, because then you can become aware of it. And so life suddenly becomes much more simple, and you begin to practice here, where you differentiate between the isness of things and your interpretation of it. This includes people too. Every person behaves as they do according to their level of consciousness at this particular moment. In many people, their consciousness varies. Sometimes they are really unconscious, and at other times they're fairly present. You might have noticed that could happen to you sometimes still. Sometimes you're very present, and then something is triggered. I got triggered. He triggered me. He always triggers me. So you got triggered, and then so what happens when you get triggered? Something takes you over. It's like you become somebody else for a while. And you might even say things that you later regret when you're a bit more conscious again. You say, oh, I said something terrible. But it's too late, you said it. Of course, then forgiveness has to come in. Oh, there's another problem. You have to forgive yourself. No, you don't have to forgive yourself. That's too complicated. You just have to see that neither you nor anybody else can manifest behavior or speech that is beyond their level of consciousness at that particular moment. That's obvious. So if you get annoyed with people, or of course some things on a practical level you can have changes on a practical level. You can say, don't do this. This behavior is not acceptable, and that's a clear statement. It doesn't have to be reactive. But to learn to realize that, and this is a strange way of putting it, when you criticize other humans, or you look at them and say, oh, the dreadful person. I wrote that somewhere, I think in the book Stillness Speaks. If you had the same personal history as this person, And if you had the same level of consciousness as this person, you would behave in exactly the same way. Because that person is determined by his or her past. The behavior is determined by the conditioning of this person's mind. Now this, of course, we have to look very carefully. It seems to imply that people are not really, and this is a little problematic, people are not responsible for what they say or do. Is that true? Is nobody responsible for what they say or do? Well, you can see that a very unconscious person, they cannot help doing what they do. And even if they do dreadful things, if they were more conscious, they would not. However, the evolution of human consciousness happens gradually, and sometimes right now much faster than before. It happens through suffering for all those who are very unconscious. They generate suffering for themselves and others. Suffering, when you're very unconscious, you generate an enormous amount of suffering for yourself and anybody who happens to be in your immediate surroundings. And ultimately, although you're not responsible for what you do, you will suffer the consequences of your unconsciousness. And that's a karmic thing. It's only by suffering the consequences of your unconsciousness you have an opportunity or a chance of eventually awakening. So even the seemingly most adverse conditions and states of other humans that make them do perpetrate dreadful things, ultimately there's a larger purpose embedded in this. It's not immediately obvious, and that is the very unconscious humans. And even if unconscious humans form a collective, an unconscious energy field, it could be a region or sometimes a whole country can become very unconscious. Everybody gets taken over by deep unconsciousness. It's happened even in the 20th century to several countries that suddenly got taken over by an enormous collective unconsciousness. And that produces enormous suffering. And yes, what Jesus said on the cross, forgive them for they know not what they do. They know not what they do, of course, means they're completely unconscious in modern terminology. So it does not free you from suffering the consequences of unconsciousness, because that is part of the evolution of human consciousness. Is up to a certain point it happens through pain and suffering, and it's self-generated through the unconscious state of humans. And then at some point, when you've suffered enough, there's a chance of awakening. It might be after 20 years in prison, or it could be you're in some dreadful, totally violent surroundings, and every day there's shooting and bombing, and whatever way it manifests. So you see the reflection in the external world of your state of consciousness, and then you suffer and suffer and suffer, and then suddenly something in you cracks open, the hard egoic shell that was in many cases a collective ego, that perhaps those collective egos are even more insane than individual egos. They can perpetrate it far worse crimes than personal egos. I mean, look at the crimes. The worst crimes of humanity are not perpetrated by the criminals or crazy people who are obviously either mentally totally insane, clinically insane, or hardened criminals, or they do bad things, but this is nothing compared to what so-called normal people do when they identify with the collective ego. Entire countries have destroyed in Russia, in Germany, in China, in the 20th century. Normal people have killed millions even of their own people in their own country, not even talking about warfare between countries. So that's a gradual an awakening happens through intense pain, intense suffering. But you don't even need to, you can observe it just by observing yourself, how up to a point you needed your suffering. If you hadn't suffered, you wouldn't be here. If I hadn't suffered, I wouldn't be here. I know that. I would be, don't know what I would be doing. Probably drinking beer and watching television. No need to do anything. What's the point? The challenges come at you continuously, small and large. Up to a point, the challenges, the way in which you respond, or rather react to the challenges, create suffering, to use that term, create unhappiness, misery, anger, many forms of suffering, but I'm using the Buddhist term, suffering, unhappiness, you could say, in its many, many forms. So when the challenges come, up to a certain point, the challenges make you unhappy, the challenges make you miserable, resentful, angry, dejected. All kinds of things happen when the challenges come one after another. Life never leaves you alone. Oh, God, I want out of here. Some people say, why? Just when I thought I've sorted out one area of my life, okay, I got the job and a great job and everything is, then something else goes wrong. There's a relationship problem, or then there's a physical problem, or there's a problem in somebody close to you, something bad is happening to them, or there's some death happening close to you, suddenly some great loss, or whatever it is, unpleasant people making your life difficult. Not unheard of. It happens. And so and up to a certain point, the challenges of life are transformed into unhappiness. And then you reach a point where you recognize the challenges are inevitable. They continue coming. It's like the waves and when you watch the ocean, and the big waves come and break. They come and you can see when approaching. At first it doesn't even look that big, but you can see this movement of the water comes. It's coming, it's coming. And then finally it goes. This is how challenges come at you, but they're not always these huge waves. Sometimes they are. There can be little irritating ripples that come at you. Don't like that. And up to a point, you become unhappy, but you're not happy, and you complain about life. You don't want it to I've had enough, or you get very angry at everybody and everything because it's all their fault. Or you angrily deny the existence of God. How would God allow a place like this? I would be morally superior. I could create a better world than this. How can you allow this to happen? This is a very common argument. We may address it again at some other point during the... And so you get angry at God. God in this case is, of course, a mental concept that you have of somebody who is in control of everything. And so you get angry with God, and then you get angry that there is no God. And then up to a point, and suddenly, when you no longer demand that life should not be difficult, that these things should not be happening to you, then suddenly something shifts. Challenges keep coming, but they no longer make you unhappy. They make you more present. So there comes the wave or the ripple, and perhaps you see it coming, or it comes so suddenly that you don't see it coming. There it is. And you go, there's another one. And as they come, they create an alertness in you that would not be there if the challenges were not be happening. In fact, you needed them, because without them, you would be half asleep. This is the human condition. You would be in a somewhat lethargic state, because life is fine, I'm doing fine. Every animal develops their particular power because of challenges. They need the challenges, and then through the challenges they develop certain powers of like extreme speed. And they all have a high degree of alertness. The animal needs its own alertness. It's very different from the presence that arises in humans. It is a higher level of consciousness, but it's the same consciousness. The animal is very present and alert, because if the animal were not present and alert, it would have become extinct a long time ago. And so some animals, like the deer, there's deer around here, these with big ears, there. And the deer have, if you look at the ears of deer, they are enormous, very long, and the ears go, wherever there's a little noise, the ear moves that like a radar, and is very, very alert. Because if they were not alert, would you get, well, maybe not here, but until very recently, and in many places still the case, it would get killed. It only survived, it had to develop the alertness, like every bird has to develop a high degree of alertness. Because when you look at a bird, you see pure alertness on its own level, because the bird goes. Beautiful, you can learn presence. And then, of course, when they're not alert, then they find a safe place, and then they're totally at rest. And they're not thinking about their problems, because they haven't reached the level of consciousness that produces problems. They are below problems. And your destiny is not to regress to a level of consciousness below problems by becoming stupid, because that's not where the evolution is going. The evolution is going towards greater consciousness. You rise above the problems. You don't fall below your problems. You begin to rise above your problems, and then certain problems are still there, but also, yes, challenges continue to come, but because the way in which you deal with the challenges is now suddenly very different, you no longer complain about them, you no longer have an underlying assumption that these things should not be happening to you. This should not be happening. No, you see it for what it is. It's one of the many challenges of life that come and come and come. So you no longer have this assumption that there is something wrong with your life because of this. You can also see through the delusion of things that you see online. You begin to realize that what people post on Facebook is an illusory image of who they are. You no longer think, oh, look, their life is so great, because look how the great meals that they have, and send photos of, and they're always happy. Look where I am. And they look so good, their face is just so unblemished that of course it's you have to remind yourself that these are technical things that you can use. You can overexpose the face so much that you don't even recognize who is there. You just see the big eyes. And everybody looks beautiful like that. They did it to me too. We had photographers done. And I just couldn't get rid of these photos, that we need new photos. But every photographer, when you get the photos, has done something to your face. It's crazy. So the challenge is there's no longer the expectation that the world is here to make you happy. It's not. Oh, that's a big relief. I thought it was here to make me happy. So I don't need to complain anymore, because it's pointless to complain about something that is actually, it's meant to be like that. Why? Okay. And then suddenly the challenges that come no longer transformed into heavy problem making. Not only that, because only part of the challenges of life come from so seemingly outside of you, through other people and events and things that happen. And a very great part of challenges actually come from your own mind. And that is, I would suggest, the greater part of challenges in your life are not through external events, although yes, they also happen, but the greater part of challenges is the unobserved mind. What your mind is doing and saying about your life, the narrative in your mind, and the dysfunction of your mind, the misinterpretations of everything in your mind when you, as I mentioned earlier, when you look at life through the conditioning of your mind, the veil of conditioning, the narrative, and you cannot separate what is from your interpretation of what is. And then that is, and suddenly you realize, okay, here's the challenge, and you're not complaining anymore. You're just looking at it and facing it. And you become more alert through every challenge that arises. Even the little ones, like your flight is cancelled, you arrive at the airport, it's a little challenge. Or you stumble and you fall and you break something, that's a little bit bigger challenge. But the mechanism behind the reactivity is the same. So first you can start with little things that go wrong. Flight is cancelled. It's cancelled. Nobody's telling you what's happening. And there are 50 people angry all around you. So you're either drawn into that, or you just, okay. Because you see it as, it's a sign for me to be alert. It's an opportunity for intensified presence. And then you become actually intelligent for the first time, because you access one could say, higher intelligence, and then if a certain action is possible in that moment, you take action, and it'll be right. It's not reactive. It's action, but not reaction. And if no action is possible, you're simply in a state of complete surrender, and you feel great, just. And maybe you sit there for 2 hours, and still nothing has happened, and then perhaps you go to a hotel, or you sleep on this chair, and it no longer creates a problem in the conventional sense of the word. It no longer creates an unhappy entity that is you. It creates more alertness. And I have had accounts of people who were given a very serious prognosis when they went to see their doctor. And usually the case is that when the doctor tells you something that might imply that there is not much time left For you, that's a terrible thing when you believe that your life is not complete yet, that there's so much more that you wanted to do, that you could do, but you may not be able to do it. So usually the first reaction would be very great suffering. But in some people, that also has created, I've had quite a few accounts of people who suddenly became intensely alert and present. They refused to leave the present moment because they realized, either through coming into contact with this or some other similar teaching, or intuitively, without having any guidance, they realized, if I leave the present moment, I become unhappy. If I go just a few months into the future where I may not be here anymore, or the body or me or whatever, I become unhappy. So they got just totally present and suddenly feel a sense of not only great alertness, but almost elation. There was an account a few years ago of unfortunately I've forgotten his name, a British musician, relatively well known, but not world famous. And he was only, I believe, in his 30s or early 40s. He was given this diagnosis that he would only have another year to live. But this was an unusual case. He told it in an interview, he walked out of the doctor's office and without going through the stage of suffering first, he immediately experienced, without having read any spiritual book, he immediately realized this arising of very intense sense of aliveness. And he lived completely in the present moment, suddenly started living completely in the present moment. And then he said in the interview, he thought, why didn't I do this before? Why did I wait for this? And he felt, you can't call it, it's not happiness what he felt, it's not happiness, that's a superficial thing. Something deeper than happiness, he felt life itself. The joy of life that is deeper than happiness or unhappiness. Perhaps even to call it joy is not quite right. That an intensified sense of aliveness. And what is that? What is that intensified sense of aliveness? And what happened? Why did he, or anybody to whom something like that happens, why do they suddenly feel that and they didn't have it before? Because time was removed from them. There was no more time, no future. And without future, the ego cannot survive. The sense of self, the egoic sense of self needs future and it needs past. It's up through the past, and it needs future for its fulfillment, and of course ultimate destruction. But the ego doesn't want to talk about that. So the ego got destroyed through that very quickly. And so it has happened to people who have lost everything, who were involved in huge natural disasters or man-made disasters. It doesn't happen to everybody. Some people remain stuck in terrible suffering. But it's always an opportunity for true spiritual awakening. And so, but you have come here now because you no longer need. You've done the stage of suffering. So suffering may still be important because it will intensify your presence when it comes. But you don't need suffering as such because you are voluntarily inviting the state of presence into your life. It begins to manifest through you. And then the challenges that happen also are not the same that they were when you were unconscious and continuously reacting angrily or despondently in a very unhappy way, where you actually, through the dysfunctional reaction, what you do, you amplify every challenge that happens in your life. When you cannot face it for what it simply is, when you build up a huge narrative around it, you amplify it. Let's go back to a very simple thing. Your flight is cancelled at the airport, and you get taken over by reactive mode. You walk up to the counter, you start shouting at the employee, how dreadful this airline. You should make sure that your clients are, and you build it up. So what before was a relatively small thing, through your reactivity, you amplify it. And what often happens then, the other person amplifies it back. And you get huge drama. And then they call the police and you're dragged away. One often reads about people, especially these days in planes, perhaps because the seats are so narrow. So many people get very unconscious on planes, and they start making a scene and shouting, and then the plane has to land somewhere, and they have to be taken off the plane. And this is a typical example of how something that was a little challenge, you had to sit in this very confined space for 2-3 hours, okay, and you had to sit there, but their level of consciousness, perhaps through excessive intake of alcohol, became even lower than it would be normally. And then the little challenge becomes amplified so much that they end up in prison. And this is just one example of how in human interaction, how humans, they amplify the challenges, and then they get amplified back, and then sometimes even more humans participate in it. And then you get violence and warfare, and it's just the same thing. It happens in one individual, it starts, and then it spreads. And so the way in which you deal with challenges then changes, it's no longer reactive. And when you no longer amplify the challenge, what tends to happen, and this is almost like a little miracle, it dissipates much more quickly and becomes transformed into something else. When you no longer fight it, then very often, very quickly, something else happens, some helpful circumstance that suddenly you say, oh, that's great. Or either something else arises to compensate for what just happened. Sometimes something even better arises if something is taken away from you. So the flight is cancelled, and then, who knows, somebody says, oh, I have a private jet, come and join me. It's a little far-fetched, but... and of course you wouldn't get in a private jet because it's bad for the environment, so don't go there. So if you have a different relationship with the challenges of life, they dissipate more quickly, and if they don't dissipate, they become transformed into something different and helpful. Instead of amplifying them, you help transform them. It's through your state of consciousness. So although I'm saying that challenges continue to come at you even as you become more and more present, that is true, but it is also true that they dissolve more quickly. And what is also true is, even if they don't dissolve, they no longer make you unhappy. And so you no longer have an unhappy identity, an unhappy sense of self. And that's a great relief when you're no longer deriving your sense of who you are from this unhappy sense of self. And if you look at humans, not humans who are here, but normal humans, when you look at normal humans, you often see that their basic identity is a very unhappy one. And quite a few are just waiting for the next thing to be unhappy about. They look at you and they want some kind of reaction so that they can get angry. They are, as somebody once put it, a grievance in search of a cause. So it's not the cause that causes the grievance. The grievance is already part of their sense of identity. And of course, if a grievance is part of your sense of identity, you find causes continuously. Especially if you start reading stuff online. Is it too hot here?
Yes.
Now, either we can do something about it, or we surrender. I'm told that there is air conditioning here, but it has not been turned on yet. There are also, surprisingly, windows there. I don't know if they are open or closed. It's dark there, I can't see. They can feel a little bit of air. That was a very good idea. Somebody opened a window. Okay, now the question is your mind saying something? Just before we started addressing this particular situation, was your mind saying, I can't stand this anymore? Why can't they do something here? This is just awful. How do you expect people to just sit here in this heat? So your practice then is with the little challenges that you encounter here through external events and the sometimes somewhat bigger challenges through your mind, whatever narrative your mind is creating around the present moment. And then experience the freedom that comes from facing the present moment without a narrative. It is as it is. This moment is as it is. And you don't add anything to it mentally. You're just present with what is. Suddenly, you feel liberated, and of course that's you're awakened at that moment of complete alignment with the isness of things. There's no longer an egoic entity there. The egoic entity needs for its survival non-alignment with the isness of life, which is always now. I'm saying it again, the ego needs for its continued survival that sense of non-alignment with the isness of things. It needs to be have an antagonistic relationship with life that strengthens the ego, and the ego has an antagonistic relationship with life. And what's life? Where does life happen? Always here and now. So the ego has an antagonistic relationship with the present moment. It wants something else. And that something else is never here and now. So it's condemned to continuous unhappiness. And it loves its unhappiness. It loves it because it's sustained by it. It is the food for it's the fuel for the ego, is unhappiness. It loves antagonism, having enemies. Great. Nations do it. We need an enemy because who are we if we don't have the other? So we need to emphasize the otherness of the other. People do it to other people, but nations can do it also to others. So who is the bad nation now? We need to find these are the bad guys. there was a problem when Soviet communism collapsed because this one big enemy suddenly didn't seem to be there, and then for a while they didn't know what to do. Well, then of course came the terrorists and all that, so that's fine, and then. But now they've discovered that Russia is bad, not even without communism. Russia has continuously evil intentions to interfere in elections. Of course, the United States never do. So, so the practice then of not adding unnecessary narrative to what is, and suddenly you become free, you're just alert. Wow. But what does that imply? What does it imply when we say not adding a narrative? What is a narrative? A narrative is a sequence of thoughts. So, not adding a sequence of thoughts to the present moment, what it's really saying is there's a space of alert stillness. Because then that means you're not adding a narrative. You're aware, but you're not interpreting, not conceptually. There's a deep knowing in that awareness, but it's not conceptual. There are two types of knowing in this world. One is conceptual mind, and the other type of knowing is non-conceptual, and that's far greater. That's intuitive knowing. That is higher intelligence, one could say. When you look at something and you know, but you don't call it anything. So you remove. So not to add unnecessary mental baggage to what is implies that you're able for a moment to face whatever is in the state of alert stillness. Like the heat here now. It just is. If you don't complain about it mentally, then it's not comfortable. Nobody would even say it's comfortable, but you don't have to call it in your mind it's dreadfully uncomfortable. You don't even have to call it uncomfortable. You know the body would rather be somewhere cooler. It's not a problem. You could get up and go out, and well, if that's your choice. Or you can stay and say, this is what is. So if you can't get out, or you choose not to, that's the isness of this moment. And then you become free, as your inner state becomes increasingly free of external conditions. The external conditions no longer determine your inner state of consciousness. That's an enormous freedom, because until that happens, you're at the mercy, for your inner state of consciousness, you're at the mercy of what happens continuously. An unpleasant person makes you feel equally unpleasant or disagreeable or even worse, and then you have a nice person, you feel, oh, that's nice, and then something good happens, you feel, oh, great, but it never lasts so very long, and then the next thing happens that's bad, and it's, oh my God, oh gosh. So it continuously at the mercy of situations, people, and so on. And so you're reacting. All this keeps the ego, the false sense of self, going. So your practice here is then, as much as possible, face the present moment without any narrative and experience the beauty of that. It's easy with nature. You can look at a tree, you can look at the sky and the many plants here without imposing any narrative on it. You can just watch. Wow. Wow is a good word. Wow is ultimately, it's the least conceptual you can be. Wow is just wow. Wow. After wow comes nothing. There's just a space. Wow. Wow is not really an interpretation. It's just a remnant of an interpretation. Wow. And then there's stillness. I don't know, it's maybe apocryphal, but they say, I read them as Steve Jobs, the iPhone man, when he died, his last word was, "Wow, I don't know if it's true." But that's a nice last word. If I have to have a last word, why not wow? Wow. I will let you go soon, but not quite yet. Just a few more minutes. A few more minutes. Don't count the minutes. One more thing now. While you're here, this is just an additional comment, but all connected with what we've been saying. As much as possible, don't carry around with you, or as little as possible, carry around with you your life situation in your mind. Everybody has a life situation, something that you left at home, a certain set of circumstances and problems. Problems, yes, everybody has them. A certain set of circumstances and problems to do with other people, your job, your health, your financial situation, your living situation. Some of these things get mixed into a particular mixture, configuration, and so there's not a single person who does not have a somewhat problematic life situation. When you look back to things that needs to be solved, or something needs to be sorted out, or don't know, big problems, what's going to happen, you don't know. So usually people walk around carrying this burden of their life situation. They're so identified with it, the entire personality is made up of this problematic life situation, and they don't know they're carrying this burden around. And most of the time they think about it. And they think by continuously thinking about it, they must arrive at some kind of solution. But that's not how a solution arises. Focused thinking from time to time, yes, but continuous overthinking is the opposite of finding a solution. It's amplifying the so-called problem and amplifying a problematic sense of self, which is a huge, heavy ego. So don't walk through the beautiful surroundings here with the heaviness of your life circumstance, I call it your life situation. You can take it up again when you go home and address your problems. Whatever can be done, you do. What cannot be done, you surrender to. That's fine. But this is about something else. It's not about your life situation. It's about finding life. The life that's underneath your life situation, and that is the being. Your life situation is concerned with doing all kinds of things and happenings, but underneath your life situation, there is a transcendent, I sometimes call it a transcendent dimension. There's a sense of beingness, of presence, that is far deeper than your person. It's underneath the person, so to speak. Then when you get, this is why you're here, to go into this sense of being, so that you are not consumed by your life situation and by doing. So this is not denial. This is not denial of your life situation. It's finding the transcendent dimension. And once you begin to find the transcendent dimension, you're just becoming still here, alert, still, watch. Transcendent dimension begins to open up. Don't think about your problems here. What point is that? And how do you get out of it? If your mind has a certain momentum and you cannot stop thinking, the mind, then just choose certain simple practices, no matter where you are. Choose conscious breathing. Even while you're walking, choose conscious breathing into the body, and you begin to feel the inner body. You feel the abdomen. I'm developing a Buddha abdomen. That must be a good thing, I suppose. So, abdomen, you feel that, and that takes you out of the mind. It brings you present. Sense perceptions. Be alert. Look. Listen. feel on the air on your skin, breathe, the scent. All come to your senses. Breathe. All these things take you out of the mind, and so that is how you let go of your life situation while you're here, and begin to explore the beingness of you, the deeper I am, the transcendent dimension. And you begin to realize then that who you are is not your historical personality that happens on the surface of life. Yes, you need to deal with stuff. You cannot say, I'm not dealing with anything anymore because it's all an illusion. You have to deal with it. That's part of it. If you deny it completely, then life will show you that that's not the way. So you have to deal with it, but not be consumed by it. If you're consumed by it, it's a terrible fate. Then ultimately it means you're consumed by your mind, because the life situation exists and you keep it alive in your mind. And the demands of life are constant, the external demands. The life wants you to do this and that and that and this. There's the financial stuff and there's the relationship problems. People are so complicated. Oh my God. And then don't be consumed by this. So we are here to find the transcendent dimension, so your sense of who you are is derived from there. And then you can deal with the rest. But if your sense of who you are, your sense of identity is derived from the historical person with its problematic life situation, then you're lost, basically. You're lost. You're lost in your life situation, which is overwhelming, and you're lost in your mind, basically. That's what it means. The one Indian teacher described the human condition. What's the human condition? Is basically lost in your mind. So that's the secret then is, does your sense of identity come from? Where do you derive it from? Your sense of identity is, and we will be going deeply into that, because my sense of transcendent identity is no different from my transcendent identity isn't really mine. I just say like that. Your transcendent identity is not yours, although sometimes I might use that word, yours. There's a transcendent identity in that we are one. Once you realize that who I am in my essence is identical with who you are in your essence, that's a wonderful realization. And if you want to put a word to that essence, you can say is the essence of who we are is consciousness. But not my consciousness or your consciousness. We are expressions of the one consciousness, temporary incarnations, disguises of the one universal consciousness. So you are the universe. There's an underlying consciousness that manifests through all the multiple billions of life forms. It incarnates continuously. It is born and dies, is born and dies, is born and dies. And gradually there's an evolutionary process that we cannot possibly understand. But it's there, it's happening. So you are the consciousness of the universe. You're not, in addition to being a person, which seems to be so overwhelming and all-consuming, there's something much more vital and important that you are, and that's the consciousness of the universe, incarnating as a person. But the strange thing is, through facing the problems of the so-called person and the challenges, who you are beyond that begins to emerge more fully. There's again a little paradox. It's through the very things that seem to block the evolution of your consciousness are actually the things that bring it about, the things that will intensify your consciousness. And again, as I've said before on various occasions, that is the deeper meaning of the Christian cross, which is this: whether you're a Christian or not, you're able to see the truths that the Christian cross points to, although some people say, oh, I don't like the cross, it's suffering. No, it's not just suffering. The cross is a torture instrument, and it's a symbol for the transcendent dimension, which we could call the divine. The cross is a holy symbol for the divine, and it's a torture instrument. It's a weird paradox. So the very thing that's the torture instrument, where the archetypal human is being tortured and killed, and then transcends that, and suddenly the torture instrument becomes something very different. It's a symbol for the transcendent. And so you don't have to be a Christian to see that there's something hidden in that, and that applies to everybody's life. So the very thing that seems to block your progress on the path, those challenges, are actually there to awaken you. And that's a wonderful realization. And with that, I will conclude this hot evening.